Welcome to Three, a part of the Tennis Channel podcast network. I'm Gill Gross with Joel Drucker and Amy Lundy. We are wrapping up the 2024 season with some massive topics, one expected, one unexpected. The latter being the formation of the latest super duo. Novak Djokovic has hired Andy Murray to be his next coach. They'll work together this offseason. They'll work together at the Australian Open, and then they will take it from there. So we will be dissecting that incredible news that has been likened to fan fiction by some. But first, Rafa Nadal has finished his career at Davis Cup in Malaga, Spain, lost to Botic van de Zandschulp in the quarterfinals. Netherlands ended up beating Spain despite Alcaraz's victory in singles. That spelled the end. They did a ceremony on court, and we can now look back on the send-off for Nadal. So, Amy, I want to start with you. And were you satisfied by this ending?
Not really, but it doesn't matter if I'm satisfied. It matters if Rafa is satisfied, and I don't think he is, only because he didn't really want to let go, and who could blame him? You know, after ruminating on it for a few days, though, it did occur to me that the retirements that we've had so far of the big three are indicative of their persona or their style of play. So Roger had this very elegant goodbye at the Laver Cup where, the best champagne and the best video montage and it hit all the right notes emotionally and it was gripping and just wonderful and everybody left with the feels. Nadal's goodbye was a grind, just like he plays. I mean, it lasted, the better part of this year. There was one tournament during clay season where they wanted to play a montage, but he wouldn't let them because he wasn't sure. So he left the court because he was mad because he lost. Who wouldn't be? And then in the end, the whole setting of the Davis Cup, who was going to play when, and wouldn't it have been great if Nadal and Alcaraz could have paired in that final match? But the cookie just didn't crumble that way. So, it was a little bit rough, but that's okay. Nobody's going to remember any of this when they think back on his career. And there are so many wonderful moments and memories that came out when he did retire, and we were all able to discuss this as the tennis world.
I think it's also interesting that it ended in a way that Nadal would have liked because no one knew it was his last match until that doubles match had ended and Spain was eliminated from Davis Cup. So in a way, it wasn't as if Rafa lost that day, and that is Rafa's match because then there was a singles and then there was a doubles that Spain lost, and only once Spain lost that doubles, oh, it's over for Rafa. In a way, at one level, I bet he almost liked that because there wasn't then the whole fanfare of Rafa, your last match, bring out the carpet, bring out the ceremony and all this. So it just kind of there it was, and the team had to go on, and he had to cheer on Spain, and that's that. And there'll be other ceremony. There'll be many, many summer ceremonies for Nadal in different ways at different places, tournaments that want to bring him back and honor him, and et cetera, et cetera. And we'll see how all those go, which ones he wishes to participate in that with, whether it's Barcelona, Monte Carlo. I mean, the whole clay court part. He's a past Wimbledon champion. There'll be something for that for an anniversary at some point. I mean, I think 2028 will be the 20th anniversary of his first Wimbledon title, etc.
Yeah, so you think there's going to be a lot more kind of Rafa send-off fanfare next year potentially, or moving forward?
Certainly moving forward, I mean, with certain events that are going to invite him to be part of them, and then they'll be kind of fall into the hierarchy, and he'll see how they work. And he might just say, I don't want to do anything in 2025, but I think eventually there'll be some good reasons for him to return to these events and wave and be there. They're
Yeah.
not that
Well,
far from where he lives.
I think it's a matter of if he wants to or not, right? But I think that option will be out there for him. The Davis Cup send off definitely felt low key. definitely felt far less grandiose, not in comparison just to Roger Federer at the Labor Cup, which was of course an event that also he spawned, which kind of added to the story of it. But even Andy Murray, because he said his goodbye at Wimbledon. And had Rafa known that he was done after Roland Garros or after the Olympics or whatever, it would have opened the door for those events to kind of stage the goodbye. And those are just larger stages, right? There's more spotlight on a Wimbledon and a Roland Garros. I don't know that Davis Cup at the end of the year indoors in Malaga, Spain, and it was great that it was in Spain and the crowd was awesome. And you had David Ferrer and Feliciano Lopez and all the, who's who of Nadal's generation of Spanish tennis. But it felt way smaller than what you would think a Nadal retirement send-off would be.
Well, and maybe that was part of his plan in a way anyway. Good, and glad for that. And also, given what Davis Cup has, it's interesting how Nadal said, "I lost my first Davis Cup match. I lost my last one." So the circle of time. However, and this gets the thing with Davis Cup, that Davis Cup in '04, where he really hit the stage, that was 27,000 people in the finals versus the US. That was an unprecedented crowd for a competitive match. And so now to see what Davis Cup has become, and it was a 2 out of 3 set match, and a 3 set for the tie instead of 3 matches for that, and then a doubles. It's just, yeah, it also connects to what Davis Cup is right now, which is sad for people who so enjoyed Davis Cup.
Yeah, you had Carlos Moya criticizing the ceremony, saying that it didn't quite live up to what he felt it should be. And then you had Feliciano Lopez and David Hegarty, who's the ITF lead, defending it and, having to do PR to say, I think Hegarty said we did what Nadal wanted. And then I think Lopez, I forget exactly what Feli said, but it was shades of Madrid. So it's interesting how it played out, right? You never want the organizers to have to defend the ceremony afterwards.
Well, one of these
It
things,
was bumpy. It was bumpy. But again, nobody's going to remember
It's
this.
true.
I just my quote unquote problem with it was the way that the matches were set up. But this was Nadal's desire. This was his doing. This is the way that he planned it. And it's he's going to go on to the other things in his life, his family, his other projects, his academy, and this is not going to be front and center for him. So I think a more interesting topic or question
Yeah.
is what will Nadal do next in the sport? Will he be more private? Will he, pick up another sport like golf and just not play in the PGA Tour or whatever, but just become competitive, find another competitive outlet because there are certain players that no matter how old they get, they still like to compete. And you could envision that he's one of those people.
that's a great point. I want to see where his body is. I think we give him at least a 2 year decompression period to kind of do nothing and enjoy his time with his family and his friends and just kind of like take in. I mean, every pro tennis player I've ever talked to is talk about what it's like 3 months after they're through playing, and oh, I don't have to go somewhere. I don't have to practice. And part of it is kind of for some of them it has economic meaning because there's a short, they can only do that for so long. Obviously, Nadal doesn't have to work a day in his life, but yeah, right. What becomes I always wanted to do it as kind of like a Wheel of Fortune game show board game, which is like coaching, team coaching, television commentary, corporate appearances, and what becomes the whole wheel of things that they get on the board with, right? I mean, I don't like it'd be interesting to see what people think are the more likely. Probably the least likely is sustained week in and week out coaching of a player. Like I heard, you guys hear that Alcaraz has a brother who's pretty good? He's a younger
Hmm.
brother.
Yeah, he's
So
got yeah, and he's got an older brother also.
I don't see Rafa spending 27 weeks on the tour with him in the year 2029. I don't see that as a scenario. Do you?
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
I so Rafa's got some well-known hobbies. He loves boating, he loves fishing, he loves golf. I don't know. Does Andy Murray have that? Does he? I'm not sure what Andy, who obviously is taking the opposite approach as we're suspecting Rafa will take, and is jumping right back to travel. Murray will not miss an Australian Open. I mean, he played it this year. He will coach it next year. He did not miss one. I mean, that's how quickly he's jumping back into this.
So you're wondering if Murray has other interests. We don't, just because he hasn't said, we don't know that entirely. I think, Murray and Raf have very different relationships. Well, not very different. Certain aspects of the relationship with tennis are different, given even how they played and how they saw the game. The both work hard, but kind of Nadal's is based on the raw effort to hitting the ball and playing the way he needs to. And there's this whole strategic, tactical dimension to how Murray built his game that was first nurtured by his mother. You got to look at those family members. You look at Uncle Tony and you look at Judy Murray. You see the way they each approach the game, which has some similarities, but some differences.
When I saw that Murray was going to be acting on stage and some sort of production, I really felt that. Like, yes, because he has this artistic side, sort of. Um, so I thought maybe he'll just try his hand at this for a while. But
Acting.
then, right. But then, which we're going to get to, the fact that Murray joined Novak's team, when I really thought about it, that didn't surprise me because the guy is one of the best minds in tennis. He loves the sport. He's just one of the best when it comes to this sport. So the coaching doesn't surprise me either.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we see Murray as a likely. I mean, I'd be staggered if Murray never the Davis Cup captain, right? Don't you think that's a
Unless he has I agree with you, unless there's a player coach relationship that is beyond Davis Cup captaincy, right? Like Juan Carlos Ferrero could be the Spain Davis Cup captain if he wanted, but that's actually for him a
good
step
point?
down, a demotion in a
Yeah,
way.
right. Right. But I just think you're right. I think Murray is kind of he loves the court. He loves the game.
People were wondering about Draper, like are you going to help Jack? And then Andy said, well, that's up to Jack, and if he asks, then we'll go from there. But it ended up being Novak asking.
Haha.
No, Andy, from a personality standpoint, I agree with you guys that it just makes a lot of sense because he's just known as this intensely analytical, borderline overthinker who was notoriously hard to coach because of that reason. Like he was so strong-headed about his ideas, about how he should play and what his tactics should be, that I think a lot of coaches stepped into that role to try to guide Andy. And it was almost difficult to guide somebody who had so many of his own thoughts.
That's a very interesting thought. I like that. I think Murray's awareness is very tactical, and I think some of these coaches were trying to get him at certain technical. I mean, mostly the message that emanated from Murray's coaches hit the forehand bigger.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's disagreement in that as much as kind of like technical cul-de-sacs they'd hit. Judy told me something really interesting once. When she was growing up, there weren't a lot of stroke production teachers, people like a Robert Landsdorf. And that's why Judy became very adroit at the tactical part, how you play the game. There weren't masses amounts of RSPA, level 5 instructors who understood stroking technique in Scotland the way there are in the United States. So, and that's why I think Judy's superpower became the whole understanding of the tactical dimension of the interaction with the opponent. And obviously, what I always found interesting about Andy is how he had that part so well down, and then he would kind of lose it on the kind of tranquility part, in yelling at his team, right?
I know a lot of people are really on the edge of their seats waiting to see how that'll all play out because there's kind of an unwritten rule in coaching that you remain positive and you clap, 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 and you're on your feet and you bring the energy and you take whatever they are dishing out. So I'm sure Andy will adapt and move toward that. But it'll be fun to see. And the great thing about this announcement is with Rafa retiring, we needed a pick-me-up. We needed something to really look forward to and give us a big, burst. So it really changed my mood. I got very excited. But just flipping back to what you guys were saying about technique and tactics, I think what's really interesting is that toward the end of Murray's career, people wanted him to hit the forehand bigger, but they wanted him to stop grinding, basically.
Hmm.
They
Hmm.
wanted him to try to find a way to end points faster. So he didn't really listen. It's like nobody could totally ever get him to do that. So you would think maybe on the surface that this isn't a good matchup because Novak's at the end of his career, so Andy's going to be telling him to do something that he was never really fully able to do at the end of his career. However, the expression, those who can do, those who can't teach, I think because of Andy's tactical awareness and his tennis mind, he will be able to convey this to Novak, and it could end up being, very good.
Well, also, as I always like to tell people, coaching is not autobiography. Coaching is not necessarily. It reminds me. I said this before. Someone said, "Is Edberg telling Federer to come to net more because he was such a good volleyer?" I said, "Well, first of all, I never met a coach tell a player to come to net less. Second of all, um, who knows what they're talking about? They might be talking about forehands. They might be talking about many things. And so it's not simple. I think that message with Murray and his forehand that began when he's like the first go around with Lendl back in 2012 when he
I'll
was
go
20.
back further, guys. I talked
Bad
to
Bill.
Mark Pecci. He was the coach who got Andy from outside the top 200 to inside the top 50. And they were having those conversations already. Petch wanted him to be more offensive. Andy was not on board necessarily. And that created some disagreements about how they wanted to move forward. So constant thing with Andy. The good thing for Novak, Amy, is isn't he already like in phase 5 of that development? Like he's already started that process and then some, where I think the offensive personality has already really been developed.
Yes, but with each passing year, the patterns of play, the very specific patterns of play, and when to defend and when to bring out the big forehand become even more magnified or even more pertinent. Um, so you don't want to cloud Novak's mind because he already employs, strategy people and all that. But again, how could this really a test of this, how could it be bad when you've got, basically two of the greatest minds in tennis? Plus, it'll be fun for the fans. So I applaud Novak for getting in there and getting to Andy before Jack Draper. That's typical of him to be one step ahead. And this is just, this news just made my week.
And they played so much in Australia also. So there's a lot of things. I don't know. I think it's interesting. They'll talk about, some obviously a lot of these big picture things about matches and opponents. And obviously Andy will have played 98% of the people who Novak's about to play too. So that's helpful. And they'll be able to connect in the way in every realm, people who have really been up there. I mean, these are two guys who've both been number one in the world. So there's a comfort and a belief that they'll have. There's no credibility problem for Murray to overcome, right? That even a guy, even if he hired Burdick, he might. Well, Thomas, you weren't. Yeah, okay.
Right.
You weren't there. Here's Murray, they played in Australia, and so know all sorts of things about practice pattern and certain courts and this court. Oh yeah, around 4 o'clock, the sun on Laver Arena goes here and it's hot. And okay, let's take a walk through the botanical gardens. I mean, would Murray five finals there, I believe. Um, did really well in Australia, so they have a lot in common. And of course they go way back. I mean, there was a time once when Novak flirted with becoming playing for Britain when he was a teenager. Had some
Yeah,
of that.
yeah. They were buddies in juniors.
Yeah, and that's very, there's something very nice about that. There's some just a common, I think that can't, I don't know the team sport dynamic as much, but I think in the individual sport that's so lonely and solitude, I think that cannot be underrated. That's
Massive.
very important that, oh yeah, and we played, remember that time we were in, Barcelona when we were 13, or I think that plays a lot in this too.
Yeah, I think the built-in camaraderie is massive because I really look at the potential of this partnership from an emotional standpoint more than a tactical and technical standpoint because of where Novak is at in his career. I know that's surprising coming from me, to not go straight to the X's and O's, but I think the way we are excited about this. Novak's got to be excited about this. It's the same thing. It's a shot in the arm. It's something fresh and attention grabbing. And I just think we talk so much about the motivation and needing to find, first of all, continue to find the love for competing and training and maintaining that fire, and the will to win. And that's going to be such a massive indicator for Novak's ability to have success, as he's already accomplished all of his life goals, especially after the gold medal last year. So I think you need that emotional boost, and that's what Andy could provide. And I'm curious to see, like, when it comes to the dynamic in the box, I think Murray's going to keep it positive. If anything, the guy who would kind of go back at Novak was Goran, and he was willing to kind of almost dish it back more than most coaches. But I think Andy's going to keep it very positive. But I'm curious to see just how much fire is there, how energetic is Andy in the box, and I actually think he might be pretty animated. He might get things going. I think that might be good for Djokovic.
Oh, interesting.
I
'Cause, go on, Amy.
I think in terms of the motivation, I have a little bit of a different spin. I think that it's really irrespective of Andy. Like, whether Andy's there or not, he's going to have to find motivation. Just having Andy there isn't going to be enough. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but is it a
Um,
spark? Is it a little
yeah, it's
spark?
yeah, he likes new things, doesn't he? Like,
Hmm.
he likes to try new things, new technologies, new nutrition plans, new information. So this will be a new thing. So in that way, it's not the same old, and that's good. It's good for the brain. Um, but I think he needs more than that to win a Grand Slam, especially with Sinner and Alcaraz emerging as they are. Um, what was the other thing that we were talking about just now, other than motivation?
The dynamic in the box
Oh,
during the
right.
matches, maybe.
Right. One thing that Andy does bring to the table, in addition to all that we've discussed, is humor, a really good sense of humor. Novak also has an amazing sense of humor underneath all the fiery competitiveness.
Hmm.
So I guess a part of me does worry that they'll like cut up a little bit too much like boys, and that might take their focus off. On the other side, who couldn't use a little levity? You know what I mean? And sometimes that can free up some of what, the worries or the pressures that Novak has talked about that weigh on him in certain situations. So it'll just be fascinating to watch. I literally have something to look forward to now, and I can't wait.
You're worried about Novak's focus? You're worried he's gonna lose. He's gonna be laughing with Murray instead of like,
Well,
Not in a match situation, not in match. Maybe off the court. I mean, they've had fun before.
absolutely. I think
I would worry about it with my son. I when people have like a boyishness about them, and these two do, and then they get together, I'm just fascinated to watch. I'll put it that way.
Well, if
Instagram,
we're
you know,
igno
lighting up the Instagrams around these two, there's gonna be a practice, there's gonna be a moment, there's gonna be a laugh, because you're right. Murray has a bit of a class clown quality to him that he likes.
Goran had it too, by the way.
Yes,
He's a
good
big
point.
jokester. Um, I think the other side of it, like the naysayers, so to speak, look at this as sort of a gimmicky thing that might signal that Novak is less serious about getting down to business. They might say, well, you're hiring someone with zero coaching track record, and there's no, this is almost like a fun, again, gimmicky last go around type move. That would be, I've seen some of that in the annals of the internet. So I think the
I don't know the
jokesterness of
internet.
it, yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. Okay.
Oh, I'm just saying, I think that would be, I'm introducing the counterpoint, which is that maybe this is almost for fun because it is fun, as opposed to for business and for winning the 25th major.
Totally. I
It's
mean,
a legitimate school of thought. It's maybe a last lap kind of quality to it. That's a point of view that we can't just poo-poo, that is an interesting thought. I don't see it that way because we all know how smart Andy is, but others may.
yeah, but I think
Joel, would you like to poo poo?
no, yeah. I mean, certainly. Look, we all know these are last laps of Novak's career, but I don't think there's anything frivolous about this decision. And I think, this is why I don't base my stories on what people are saying on the internet. You know what I mean? I really don't. And so that's just kind of like they're saying, who are they? The media, these people, the public. I mean, I always look at it's the time. It reminds me of the time someone on the tour said, "Oh, you guys in the media, you did this to this player." And I go, "Really? Which one of my stories are you referring to? Can you please let me know?" I mean, I just think so. Anyone who thinks that knows so little about Novak and Murray and even the game. I mean, it's serious. He's a serious, and Tremaine Fowler as dedicated. These are two guys who've been as dedicated to the game as any people who've ever played. Put their heart and soul. So I mean, look at all the things Murray's had done to his body to continue his chance to play the game he loves so much. And so they're going to do, and of course they're going to have enjoying themselves, and we're going to see some social media post of them having a laugh or something on a practice court. I mean, we just know these things have become part of the covering of the game lately. But I think the mission of Novak trying to play as well. I think the thing. How Murray conducts himself in the box, particularly, let's say, in a later rounds of a tournament, that's a bit of intrigue. I tend to always think I work on the Lendl model or the Edberg model, where the legend of the box needs to be the Sphinx. It needs to be the like for the voice of reason, and let the
Yeah.
others engage it. However, now with the on-court, the mid-match coaching and all this is a little different. It's not quite that old world thing where a guy like Tony Roach would just kind of sit there impassively and let the player play. Now there's a whole other thing, and what will Murray say to Novak during a match, and how will that go on, right?
Yeah. There's been a bit of a flat emotional quality to some of Novak's losses this year.
Yes.
And there wasn't anybody in the box to say, let's effing go here. Like maybe, and I know that's a very team sport thing. We've never thought of that as, a big tennis thing to be rah, rah, fiery motivator. We talk about that, like certainly in American football, that's huge, right? Which coaches fire up the locker room and get everybody juiced up and going. But I think I agree that the motivation has to come within, but I also think that that's part of the role of a coach. Like you can be a bit of a motivator, and that's I think Andy's biggest task here.
Well,
I think what the question is like, is he a coach or is he a super coach? You know what I mean? The coaches that Novak has had really take on more of a role than super coach, especially Goran, who got intimately involved in changing his serve. And I would think that Andy would be more like that. Um,
And
but
Andy,
go ahead.
I was just gonna, Andy invented the super coach, right? I mean, he brings in Lendl. It's kind of the first time we saw it to that extent potentially. Or Joel,
Now,
or are there
Randall brought
other
Tony Roach. Tony Roach was number two in the world.
number two in the world? Okay. How many? Okay.
So yeah, I know what you mean in the more contemporary period, but yeah, I know there are other ones. I mean, Jimmy Connors had Pancho Segura. He was number one in the world.
Yep.
Sorry, I know. I'm like Doctor.
No, no,
Doc,
I like it. I want that.
Yeah. Yeah.
these things have happened, but Murray recently, and I think when you said more than a super coach, you mean he's going to be more than like a counsel. He might get. Well, Novak's such a great tinkerer. That's what's always been interesting. He likes if he believes in the person. Yeah, all right, go. Let's look at the serve, Goran. Let's figure this one. Yeah, what do
And
you think?
that is also goes back to the newness of it. I think that was a really great point by Amy, where Novak, and I think any aging superstar, any aging legend, you want something to feel fresh, whether you're working on a new shot or you're developing an extra part of your game. That's what gets you, when you wake up in the morning, that's what gets you excited to go to the practice court. So might Andy's presence just make Novak more excited to go to the practice court because it is new and exciting?
Yeah, it's like dopamine, you
Yeah.
know? Um, yeah, it gives you something to look forward to and that kind of thing. But just going back to what Joel said, I mean, this is a little bit of a difference between me and Joel, all respect. I really do. I listen to social media and listen to what fans say. Just because a fan said it or somebody said it on social media doesn't mean there's no validity to it. You know what I mean? But to your point, we shouldn't just say people are saying without, any sort of like, well, who is saying this? I always love it when you say that. Um, but just in terms of Andy and what he brings, I think the ultimate test is, does Novak allow Andy to make minute technical changes and tactical changes? Then, is Andy feeding Novak balls? Are they together on the baseline talking about spot serving and that kind of thing? That is really in the weeds, and I'm wanting to know, what will Andy's role be in those regards?
That's fantastic, and it's fun to think about. And we know, I think these guys, a guy like Murray, and at that level, the whole coaching thing, you've got this intersection of there's tactics and there's techniques and there's psychology and then there's opponents. I mean, the things that go on, the refinements at that level of the game are so refined. I mean, and a guy like Murray, yeah, we think about a forehand. Well, we don't associate Murray with technical insight stroke wise per se. However, how many techniques, how many shots has this guy studied? Hundreds, thousands of shots and things you read from grips and little insights and tidbits and hey, look, he or whether it's tendencies and some of it is it's so visceral with people at that level. They're not always using data analytics as much as just experiences. They've spent hours and hours on the court. If you've played someone 20 times, you spent 60 hours on the court with this guy or something. So there's just this certain knowledge. And what's also big, and I think this is true for all of us, is our the perceived credibility we give them. Our willingness to, like, if you have zero credibility, you have your eyes completely shut. And if you have lots of credibility, it's like, as Murray will with Novak, wow, wow, you mean the guy ties his shoelaces before he hits his second serve, and that's the kick serve? I mean, that's the way we all look at it. And that's a little bit like my thing with the when I see, so I read stuff on social media all the time. It's just that I want to know where it's coming from. Is it an opinion or is it based on some knowledge and exploration?
I usually use I often will bring it up because it's addressing the some of the collective consciousness that tennis fans may have. So the three of us, I think, clearly don't think it's a gimmick that Andy's coming in, but I think to address it would be important because that might be a thought or a question that some have. Um, to the credibility thing, like Andy already having built-in credibility with Novak, I think that's like a must. I think that's a requirement because this is not going to be like Novak was never going to say, okay, I need a coach for 2025. Let's interview this dude who I'm familiar with his track record, but I don't really know the guy or the woman, and we're just going to do an interview and kind of feel each other out, and we'll see if this works. Like it was never going to be this like experimental period. I feel like that ship has sailed. Novak's been on tour for too long. There's not enough time left in his career to try something from a relationship standpoint. And it was always going to be something that he had comfort with or somebody that he had comfort with. Not to mention, it takes a certain level of conviction to come into Novak Djokovic's camp and
Yeah,
to try to be an authority figure.
that is a great point.
Yeah, for
Go
sure.
ahead, Joel.
Be interesting to talk to players, particularly top 10 players, and ask, how do you go about finding coaches? And now, particularly that we're in the team era, because it's not just the one guy era. Like that's
Yeah.
how Agassi found Brad Gilbert and his man. Oh, talk to Brad Gilbert, and the teams weren't. Now it's a whole different dynamic of people and trainers and physio and how. And then so the question becomes: is this person gonna integrate well into our team? That's part of it too. I mean, I think
Yeah.
of things like how Swiatek Iga, she just brought on Wim Fissette and Osaka with Patrick Mouratoglou and how that all occurs.
Well, yeah. So I just refreshed myself on Open, Agassi's uh, autobiography, and they had dinner with Brad. Like they didn't know Brad. They had dinner with Brad, and then it went well, and they were like, "Let's hire this guy." So it's funny, right, to think Novak didn't need to fly to London to have dinner with Andy. I don't think that needed to happen before this partnership was formed.
Well, Andre knew Brad because he played him. He played him enough
Yeah,
time.
yeah, but they didn't. They right, but they
I
knew each
mean,
other.
they took a meeting, and Brad had some thoughts, right? And they brought him in for the Miami tournament, and then Andre got to the finals, and this seems to be working all right. Okay, and then they just kind of rolled, but it was very yeah. It had a and I guess they all vary. I mean, this is so different than the team sports. It's much more formalized, and yeah, it's fascinating because it's still coaching in tennis is still it's in a new phase now with this mid-match coaching. It'd be interesting to get Murray's thoughts on how he thinks it goes up being effective. I mean, because obviously these guys have spent the bulk of their career not being coached mid-match, and soon we're
Yeah,
gonna have players who grew up with it. I mean, it's got to come to junior tennis at some point. It's funny the pros have it, but the juniors can't.
yeah, it is.
Amateurs in the United States at least also don't have it. Had a match last night. I was reading the rules. It said no coaching. I was like, wow, when is this going to trickle down to us? But you're right. That is a great point, Joel. This brings a whole new wrinkle. So you can actually have Andy talking to Novak mid-match and saying, here's what I see. I mean, it's just really enticing.
I thought you get a league. I thought your captain. It was a league match, Amy, or was it a tournament?
League match.
I thought the designated no. Wow.
Nothing.
And you got to play regular scoring. You can't play no at like the pros, the pro doubles players.
Right. Well, I was playing singles, but yes.
Was just thinking about one similarity, Brad Gilbert to Andy Murray in this situation. BG was also very fresh off the tour. Joel, you did mention it earlier, but I think beyond the technical stuff, I think there's going to be really intense discussion about opponents and how we want to attack them and what we want to do, because that's where I think Andy, I don't even think he's going to need to have to do too much extra homework half the time because he already studied for Lorenzo Sonigo. He played him three times, and like he's going to say this is what I think he doesn't like, and I feel like that part is going to come really naturally in the partnership. And I don't think you got that when it was Boris Becker or Yvonne Lendl more than a decade coming off the tour, where they might have had to do some scouting or flip on some tape on or YouTube or whatever in order to kind of get the same information that Andy already just simply has right now.
His mind is like a file box. And the other thing that really dovetails nicely is that these are two players that are extremely committed to the physical aspects of the game, the off court, the conditioning, all that. Top in that area of tennis. So, they'll be able to hit the gym together, and that's a philosophy that clicks together perfectly.
It's interesting though, God, I'd love to be in the Murray Djokovic discussion about Sinner. Like hear them talk.
Yeah.
Like, all right, let's figure well, where is the theoretical opening? Novak's had at least some positive Alcaraz experiences.
That's
Right?
what it feels like. That's what it's felt like over the years to try to play Novak. What the heck is the plan here?
Yeah, what's the plan? It'd be fun to see how they go about that. I once talked to Agassi about how he was talking about playing some opponents. He was talking about, well, the first 6 or 8 balls you got to go kind of deep cross court, and then maybe you find middle. It's like, it's such a high level of skill and execution. Okay, I've got to hit 8 balls fairly deep inside the baseline to this corner, and now I can do something. It's like a lot. And so you're right. Then there's the fitness component,
which I think is going to be the biggest factor for Novak's success in 2025. We might look at, Andy, because it's really fun to talk about, which we've done for the last half hour. But ultimately, how are the legs? How is the health? How quickly is he moving around the court? Those things are going to dictate Djokovic's success to a far greater degree than anything that Andy can do. Agree?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So Novak's going to play a tournament before the Australian Open. He, is obviously looking to make the most of this long refresh period and off-season training block. And it's going to be a top storyline, if not the top storyline, when we hit the ground running for January. We will, I'm sure, discuss Rafa more moving forward as we kind of look back on his career. And, we'll also have news for everybody. I know there are a lot of questions of what's next for the show. We're not going anywhere, but we're also not ready to kind of fully explain what is exactly the next step for the show. But we will get there, and don't worry, we will be staying in your lives moving forward without a doubt. That'll do it for this episode. Lucky you guys. That'll do it for this episode of 3. Remember, we're available on all podcast platforms. Appreciate it if you leave a rating and a review on Apple and Spotify. And if you're watching on YouTube, like, comment, and subscribe. We will see you next time on the next episode of 3.